Dialectical Behavior Therapy, better known as DBT, was first developed to help people with borderline personality disorder. It's groundbreaking and life-transforming. Find out more about how and why DBT works and how elements of this treatment can be helpful for all of us, next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. In our first episode of the season, we talked about borderline personality disorder, the fact that it's one of the most misunderstood mental health conditions and was once considered to be nearly untreatable. But thanks in large part to Dr. Marsha Linehan and her development of dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT as it's better known, borderline personality disorder is now considered to be very treatable. So that was kind of like a treatable hope alert there. Tonight, we're going to be talking about DBT, what it is and why it works for people with borderline personality disorder, and how elements of DBT can be helpful not just in the treatment of other mental health conditions, but for all of us in our everyday lives. If you have questions about DBT, call them in now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. We'll be answering your questions throughout tonight's show. Joining me tonight is Joanne Fairfield, a psychotherapist at the Human Development Center who specialized in dialectical behavior therapy, and Patty Olson also has special expertise in DBT, and she's the clinical supervisor of Fresh Start, a residential program for women with borderline personality disorder. Thanks so much for rejoining us. You were on our first episode, and now you're back on our fourth episode. And I think maybe really a good place to start is, and Patty, I'll start with you, is even though this is a public television viewing audience, describe what even the word dialectical means, because that's kind of a mouthful, dialectical behavior therapy.
It is. I will do my best with that. The way that I try to talk about it in, simply is that when we are thinking dialectically, we're able to balance out things that seem like extremes. And we talked a lot about high emotional sensitivity last time. And for people that are seeking DBT to work on emotion regulation, that is one of the things that can be really disruptive and interfere with that sense of self, is real fluctuating moods and really fluctuating or conflicting thoughts. For many of the people that I work with that have had suicide ideation, it is extremely validating for them to come to DBT and to be able to talk about one of the dialectics for many people, which is both wanting to die and not wanting to die. Because, oftentimes people might say, well, which is it? That can't, either you are or you aren't. You might get into that whole you're being manipulative kind of interpretation. But for people that I've worked with, it's true. It's very confusing, that they can have both of those feelings at once and not know how to rectify those.
So it is the ability to hold two opposite truths at the same time,
exactly.
Then. Yeah. And why, Joanne, does DBT seem to be so much more effective for people with borderline personality disorder than, say, more conventional treatments?
Well, I think primarily because it's skills-based. So we talked also last time about how there's a biological component as well as a nurture social component that develops the disorder. So learning skills can help people learn how to navigate their way through all those conflicting emotions and conflicting thoughts and beliefs. And so it's different in that we have group as well as individual. The group is the means by which people learn the skills in a setting where they feel supported by other people who have struggled with some of the same issues that they have. And it's really a teaching group, but it's a very supportive one, and you get homework to practice the skills. And then the individual therapy is really where people might think more easily about, but it's actually about where we reinforce skills, where we help people figure out how it applies in their lives. And then there's the other part, which is very different from other forms of therapy, which is what we call the coaching calls. And coaching calls are there so that we can be present as a therapist where people actually live and where they're actually struggling. So they can call and have access to their individual therapist when they're in crisis.
So this is really taking therapy beyond the office
Right.
and into a person's life then. And treatment is relatively long-term, right, Patty?
Yes, standard DBT is the model is that people would participate in the skills training weekly and the individual therapy once a week for a year.
And the groups themselves are often 2.5 hours long. So you're really making an investment in your life just by agreeing
Absolutely.
and committing to DBT. That to me, I'm just sort of having that thought about this, that is the first commitment to your new life, is this commitment that you're making to the treatment.
Absolutely. And I guess I want to emphasize that treatment isn't just about stopping behaviors that are damaging or potentially damaging, but more importantly, it's about how do you build a life that's worth living? And how do you move into that? So not just in terms of identifying what you want from your life, but then what skills do I need in order to get there?
And so that's a concept for all of us, right? That we all need a life worth living, not just figuring out what's the next thing that I do on my list of things to do, but how am I making sure that I'm doing something that's giving meaning to my life? And how do you help people even figure that out?
Oh, gosh. My mind is still on dialectics, and I suppose this might be part of the answer, that part of how we help people figure that out is also is to be able to embrace the idea of dialectically balancing acceptance of the person, acceptance of ourselves, just how we are in this moment, doing the best we can, and balancing that with the idea that we need to be able to make some changes to have that life worth living. And so we begin really basically by learning core mindfulness skills. We hear a lot about mindfulness nowadays. It was kind of a new term for many of us when we first started learning about DBT.
So in fact, that in DBT there are 4 different skill sets, right?
Yes.
And so you have just started talking about one of those skill sets, which is core mindfulness. And for our viewing audience who may not, maybe they've heard the term, but they don't know exactly what that means. Tell us a little bit about what mindfulness is, how it's practiced, and maybe an example of a skill that would be a mindfulness skill.
Okay. So the terms that we use to teach about mindfulness are to be able to observe, to be able to put words to what we're observing, so describing, and you observe and describe in order that you can effectively participate. So those are the what skills of mindfulness. And it gets a little bit confusing about why we break it down that much, but I like the examples of thinking about any time you learn how to do something new, whether it's playing a musical instrument or learning how to drive. You have to observe how it's done and then put words on that. And you observe and describe until you can participate naturally without having to think about it. But then when you get stuck and you don't know how to do something, you might go back and start observing and describing again. I think about that for any of us. If we're a little discombobulated or you're tired and you're not thinking clearly, you might stop and say, okay, now what was I doing? Where did I put my pen? So we observe and describe kind of naturally in our own lives, but when we're learning a new skill, we need that. And then there are the how skills, which are really important, which is one, mindfully, being able to focus attention just on what's happening in this moment. Non-judgmentally, which is really a really critical concept. And non-judgmentally, I like to say, doesn't mean just being Minnesota nice. That it means being able to not add information or filter out information, but to be able to see things exactly as they are without interpreting or making assumptions, which is very, very tricky. It's a very refined skill to be able to do.
And I think that's a skill that, you know, kind of the reason why we have to practice these things over and over again is that a lot of us human beings are really good at the judgment part, and so boy, we're going to need a lot of practice with the non-judgment part.
Right, because actually we need judgments to get through our days. So it's not about never being judgmental or having judgments. It's about being aware when you're calling an opinion, if you like, a fact. And one of the clues I talk to my clients about is if you feel very strongly, if you have a strong emotional connection with that thought, it is more than likely that there is some judgmental pieces going on with it because the one goes with the other. So it's not that you can't have opinions, it's more that you need to be able to distinguish between an opinion and a fact. You need to be able to distinguish between what you think is happening with what is happening. I often think about when I was first in art classes as a kid, and I was taught that you had to look and draw what you see, not what you think you see. And that's the hard part for people to understand. And they call it core mindfulness because those mindfulness skills are at the heart of every other skill that you learn in the program. If you've got to keep practicing those ones in order to be able to really practice the other skills we teach.
So those are really the sort of like the super foundational skills. And one of the things that we know in general about mindfulness is that it has just a whole host of health benefits as well, not just mental health or spiritual health, but physical health benefits. And so here's an example, again, of a core group of skills that, you know, this is not just for people, the skills are not just for people who happen to have borderline personality disorder, but all of us can benefit from it.
Right, and there's a reason why it's been integrated into many, many therapies and also just in practices. I mean, people can go to mindfulness classes, they can pick up mindfulness apps on their phones, they can go Google mindfulness and they'll find more than a few ways to practice those skills. And there's ways for every person out there, but my shorthand for remembering mindfulness is 2 words: pay attention.
I love that. Pay attention.
Pay attention.
Pay attention.
Pay attention to what you're feeling, pay attention to what you're thinking, pay attention to where you are, pay attention to what you're doing, pay attention to this moment.
Because so much of the time anymore we're not paying attention. We're driving and we're listening to the radio and we're making a list in our head and we're doing and we're doing and we're doing. And in order to pay attention, you have to focus then on one thing. And that is the being in the moment. Oh, I love that. I think we can, I can remember that. I can remember to pay attention. A second set of skills are emotion regulation skills.
Absolutely. So the emotion regulation skills are just what they say. They are the skills that we teach in order to help people to, having used their mindfulness skills, to be aware of what they're feeling, to then learn how to regulate them. And the shorthand we use is we get our clients to rate the intensity of whatever emotions they're experiencing, because more often than not, people come to us, they're only paying attention and have an awareness of when their emotions are really intense. If you did it on a 0 to 10, they're paying attention when it's a 7, 8, 9, 10, range. And they're kind of missing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6s. I tend to, for shorthand, say to folks, so emotion regulation is for when it's between kind of like a 2 and a 6. So they might be getting a little bothersome, and that's when you can regulate. We would use a different set of skills when we're up in the 8, 9, 10s. So there are some basic skills. So Ms. Linehan is very fond of acronyms, and they help people remember. And one of the foundational skills is what they call the please skill. And this is, again, one that everybody can benefit from. So it makes you pay attention to things that affect our emotional state. So physical illness, it's a poor bit, but that's the PL. And physical illness, we all know that when we have the flu or we're feeling run down, we tend to be more irritable, maybe a bit more tearful, those kinds of things. So pay attention to that so that you don't assume that because you're being emotional that it's all quote unquote your fault. The E is for balanced eating. Now that's different for different people, but I don't know about anybody else, but when my blood sugar goes low, don't get between me and the fridge, because I can be quite crabby, and I need to eat, and I need to eat now. So we know that we see kids, if they have too much sugar, they get.
We know actually that when people's blood sugars drop, that affects one's mood and then your ability to regulate your mood. I mean, that's kind of the scientific connection with that as well, right?
And then there's the avoid mood altering drugs. That's the A, and alcohol. And the reason we want our clients to avoid them is because we want them to pay attention to their emotions, not mask them or numb them out. And then the S is balanced sleep. I think that's self-explanatory for most people. We know what we're like when we don't get enough sleep or we get too much. And then the E is for exercise. And there's been boodles of research about the benefits of consistent exercise with regards to depression and helping manage your moods.
And in fact, I think the new research is saying now that if we could bottle the benefits of exercise into a little bottle and have that be the liquid medicine, that we would all be feeling much better. And so that is the degree to which exercise works and is helpful. And someday we have to start, I think that would be pay attention to to that research then. Patty, I often think about, and then you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is that in some ways emotion regulation skills are taking, it's like replacing the on-off switch and replacing it with a dimmer switch that has gradations in there.
Yeah.
That's how I explain it to the people who I see. Is that a fair way of?
That makes sense. When I was doing DBT therapy in an outpatient setting, that's how I would go up to the whiteboard and draw like a little gauge. We all have seen gauges in our car or on machinery where that range in between is the safe zone. But it's when our engine is in that freezing cold zone or overheated that there can be damage done, and we want to be real careful then. So it's not that emotion regulation is not to make emotions go away. In fact, we're trying to get away from that tendency to manage by not feeling, but to be able to tolerate emotions by having them be in that manageable range.
And the third group of skills is interpersonal effectiveness skills. So why don't you tell us a little bit about those skills?
Okay. So the interpersonal effectiveness skills, we look at learning how to skillfully identify what your objectives are. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? If you're making a request, you want something from someone, or you want to be able to say no to something and kind of set a self-respecting boundary. So we go through the steps of how to express that really clearly and to assert what you want, and to try to motivate the other person to see why there would be something in that for them. We talked last week about manipulation, so it's not manipulation so much as honestly trying to kind of weigh out the benefits of getting the assistance or respecting the boundary that you're setting. We work on relationship effectiveness. What kind of things do you need to do to maintain or improve a relationship? And those are the kind of things that might come really naturally with the people that we have a safe, comfortable bond with. But if it's in a relationship that's more challenged or that isn't so good, but you need to maintain that relationship, say a boss or someone who has some kind of authority, you need to keep that relationship. You need to get more deliberate about, how do I do that?
How can I ask for what I want or what I need in a way that minds or tends to the relationship at the same time?
Yes, that keeps that person liking me, because I need to not have this relationship fall apart or get worse. And then the third set of skills that we teach is around self-respect. How do I balance all of that? How do I make a request or say no, do so in a way that the other person likes me and that I feel okay about myself, that I don't sell out or compromise my self-respect in that process. So ideally, we're able to do all of those things at once, but we break them down because they're kind of individual processes, and then eventually people can pull those all together. And then we enhance that with a little bit more of like scaling. What are the things that I consider when I decide how intensely to ask for something or to say no? We don't get taught that. And we don't all know it intuitively, or if we haven't had success in relationships, we don't know how to gauge that. So you go through step by step and look at things like, does the person have authority over me? Is it appropriate to the relationship? Is it good timing? But that's really key for highly sensitive folks, because we may feel an urgency to get something accomplished in a relationship, and it might just not be good timing.
And I think a lot of times, just the basic assertiveness skills miss all of those nuanced pieces of that, which is that timing is everything. What I like about this notion of interpersonal effectiveness is I think a lot of people think we're just supposed to be naturally good at this, and that, if you haven't had good teachers in your life, why would you be good at this?
Right, and I mean, we learn from a very early age. And so many of the skills that we think we know intuitively, we actually learned, as infants. We learned how to read expressions. We learned how to mirror expressions. And if we happen to be, unfortunately, for their own reasons that they may not have control of, people did not respond in a way that was effective, or they were fairly flat, and so there wasn't a lot to read. That's hard for people to learn.
And I'm going to interrupt you because we're getting short on time, and we have to get to my favorite set of skills. And my favorite set of skills are the reality acceptance, distress tolerance. So talk a little bit about that, Joanne.
So distress tolerance skills are broken into two areas. One is the crisis skills, and that's what you do when you're actually in crisis. But given children's time, we'll go to radical acceptance, which is basically reality acceptance skills. And people, again, can find all kinds of things online about radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is one of the toughest skills that you'll ever learn, and you never get it down. Radical acceptance is something we have to practice over and over and over again. And really, it sounds so simple, but it is actually hard. It is the place where you start to realize that you are not accepting the situation or the facts of the matter or where you're at. And you kind of want to hold your breath and make it go away, or stamp your feet, or all those things internally. And so what she talks about is reality acceptance is really about being able to learn how to be where you are. It does not mean that you think it's okay, or that you agree with it, or you condone it in any way. But it does mean you have to pay attention to what is in this moment. Because if you don't know what the reality is, how are you going to change it?
And you have a little breathing radical acceptance exercise that you do. That's one of my favorite things that you do.
Okay.
And so teach it to us right now, because it's easy and you can teach it.
It's very easy. So what you do is you think of something that you're struggling to accept. And you start there, and then you go to your breathing, and you just pay attention to your breathing. And you settle your breathing down, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And when you've taken several of slow breaths and you've regulated your breathing, then you allow yourself to think of that thing you're struggling with. And then on the next in-breath, you say to yourself, I don't like it. And as you breathe out, you tell yourself, I can't control it. And then as you breathe in, you say to yourself, I accept it. And then you just breathe out. And then you go back to the beginning, breathing in, I don't like it. Breathing out, I can't control it. Breathing in, I accept it. And just breathe out. And the gift of this, you repeat it and you repeat it. The gift is that because you're regulating your breathing, it's like you're softening your body to allow yourself to open to acceptance. And when you start doing it, when you get to I accept it, you go, but as you practice it over and over and over, you get to a softer place to allow reality to be what it is.
I think that is a beautiful thing for us to end on, because we're getting really short on time. There was one call that came in that said if you have If you have a loved one who needs DBT, how do you convince them to seek treatment? Well, for one thing, you could show them the show because it will be streamed and available online. You also can go to YouTube and or Google search borderline personality disorder. There are a lot of people who have short documentary films. These are people with borderline personality disorder themselves who are talking about what it's like to have borderline personality disorder and what it's like to move through treatment. I think that would be a wonderful thing to do. So reality acceptance, absolutely radical acceptance, one of my favorite. I have to tell you that I've had to do a lot of that today because, and I'm going to do a shout out to Joanne Fairfield is leaving the Human Development Center. This is the last thing that she has done for us as part of the Human Development Center. So I have had to say, I don't like this, I can't control it, and I gotta tell you, I'm gonna have to do a lot of work on the acceptance. I did, however, get her to agree, or at least so I think, to come back next season and join us here on the show. Thanks so much for joining this discussion. Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links. Join us next week when we'll be talking about addictions and families. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching and good night.